because a court ruling, you guys, allows medical marijuana dispensaries near Arizona preschools. That's right. Medical marijuana dispensaries can operate in close proximity to preschools, the Arizona Court of Appeals ruled on Thursday, reasoning that the voter-approved law legalizing medical cannabis differentiated between schools and preschools. The ruling upholds a dispensary license that the Arizona Department of Health Services awarded back in 2016 for the Phoenix neighborhood of Otaki. The state agency, which regulates marijuana sales in the Grand Canyon state, reasoned that the law sets different rules for how close dispensaries can be to K through 12 schools and preschools. In a split opinion, the appellate court agreed, and in a quote says, because statutes mean what they say, we conclude the two phrases do not have the same meaning, and the two preschools at issue here are not a public or private school under the act, says Chief Judge David Gass, who wrote the two-page wrote for the two-judge majority. The ruling stems from a legal challenge brought by 3SL Family LLC, a company that applied for a dispensary registration certificate in Otaki in 2016, and 3SL was one of several applicants vying for a single certificate in the area. But when the Department of Health Services and the dispensary Health Services awarded the dispensary license to the competitor whose proposed location was adjacent to two preschools, 3SL sued, arguing that the location violated the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act 500-foot buffer zone requirement for schools. The AMMA, which voters approved in 2010, legalized medical marijuana in the state, but included provisions to keep dispensaries away from schools. The law prohibits dispensaries from operating within 500 feet of any public or private school, and however, the law's language left room for interpretation regarding preschools, which were mentioned separately in the statutes. The court's opinion emphasized the distinction between schools and preschools in Arizona law, which it said, in quotes, has long recognized schools are for school-age children and not for younger preschool-age children. In an additional quote, nothing about these terms or their uses suggest any uncertainty about their relationships or more than one rational interpretation of whether a preschool fits within the Act's concept of schools, end quote. Grass wrote that as well. And however, in a strong dissent, Judge Andrew Jacobs argued that the plain language of the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act makes it clear that preschools are schools. And in a quote says, it would make no sense for the same drafting hand to separate preschoolers, grade schoolers, and high schoolers from marijuana in one law, only to allow the placement of dispensaries next to preschoolers in another law while separating them from older school children. End quote. This decision could have far-reaching implications for Arizona's medical marijuana industry, and it potentially opens up more locations for dispensaries near preschools and child care facilities, which could lead to increased competition and accessibility for patients. However, it also raises concerns about the proximity of marijuana businesses to very young children. Jacobs raised that point, arguing that the restrictions on dispensary locations should be read together to protect all school children from exposure to marijuana, whether they are in preschool, elementary school, or high school. And in a quote says, separating school children from medical marijuana growing, sale, and use is one means the voters choose to protect marijuana growers, sellers, and users from prosecution, he wrote. But Grass and Judge Brian Furna said the interpretation of the state law would undermine the ability for ADHS to issue licenses and thus adversely affect the will of the voters. From 3SL Family LLC, the decision isn't the end of a nearly 8-year legal battle. Jesse Callahan, one of the company's attorneys, told the Arizona Mirror that the appeal to the Arizona Supreme Court will be forthcoming. And although Arizona's medical marijuana market thrived for a decade after voters created it, the passage in 2022 of legal adult use marijuana sales sparked a steep decline in the industry. And when adult use sales began back in January of 2021, there were nearly 300,000 qualifying patients in Arizona's original cannabis market, but there were fewer than 95,000 medical marijuana card holders in July of 2024. Well, I mean, that's a trend we've seen in all markets and whatnot when legalization happens. But man, this crazy that that simple little loophole, man, so close to a preschool. But because it's not a school.
I got something to say about this.
I bet you do, because you're cannabis real estate expert over there, right?
As an owner of children, owner of multiple children, let's be really clear. Preschools are not schools. They are daycare centers. That's what they are. They are not, like, nobody, you don't ask your 3-year-old, what did you learn today in preschool? Like, okay, great. You learned to count a few bunny crackers and you didn't shit in your diaper. Like, great, huzzah! Like, so like we have this notion that anything that's related to our children, like we have preschool. Pre means before. Okay, so the actual word means before school, and if it's before school, that means it's not a school. And just because it's related to kids doesn't make it an educational institution. And I can't think, most people don't even remember everything from when they were 3 years old. So do you think some kid is going to grow up and decide to use cannabis because at 3, while they were getting picked up and put in their child seat, they looked over and saw a dispensary sign? Give me a break. And so the other thing is, you know, they don't have the same level of accreditation requirements that a typical education institution does. So I think we have a problem with the lack of brick and mortar and the number of brick and mortar storefronts in most regulated markets. That has been compounded by local control, which has created retail deserts from Long Island to Long Beach, literally. And the idea that a preschool is a school actually doesn't make any sense when you peel back the words and examine what it really is. And so I do think that there is a reasonable argument that from elementary school to high school, impressionable youngsters who will remember their experiences, that their decisions could be impacted by those experiences. We still don't have parity with the liquor store because nobody's worried about whether there's a 40-ouncer on a shelf in a 7-Eleven and the 7-Eleven is near an elementary school. So we don't have parity. But even if we don't have parity, the idea that a preschool is some highly sensitive site, it's really a flimsy argument. And I don't think when people start looping in this will of the voter, the will of the voter didn't think that a 3-year-old was going to start using cannabis because when they were picked up by their preschool, they somehow were able to see the sign for a storefront. That is bullshit.
It's just literally a great way for NIMBYs to have an argument that's not, I just don't want it, right? So, you know, I hate when those little asshole 3-year-olds try to sneak in the dispensary and grab a pre-roll. That's so unfortunate. It sucks. Happens all the time. Huge issue. But, I mean, I think that this is like so ridiculous because preschools and daycare centers are listed as sensitive use locations in California, right? Which sucks. And I think we need to kind of address this because now we're creating this situation where these predatory landlords can be like, oh, cannabis, cool. You can't go anywhere else. You know, you're almost full at this location. Let me charge you $15,000 a month for the shoe bucket. And also I need to have 3 months in advance. And also I need to see you pull your pants down, give me your firstborn child, and I might kick you out anyway. So I think that we need to really address that. I will do the last 3 for you. Oh, boy.
I mean, that's the best point Yarrow made was the liquor store thing. I mean, like that is there. I think it's actually a genius idea for Arizona because, you know, you can't take your kid into the dispensary with you to like buy your weed. So that's a really you know, that's an uncomfortable thing to have to like, you know, figure out a babysitter to just get your weed if you don't have delivery in your area. If you do, I suggest get your weed delivered. But ultimately, you can take your kid into a liquor store, any liquor store. I just took my son to Bevmo with me, put him in the shopping cart, and was walking around the thing. You can't do that in a.
That's a new revenue stream, bro, for this preschool right there, you guys.
Yeah, the drop your kids off for a
drop
second
your kid off while I go to the dispensary.
Seriously,
Right.
this has affected a lot of business owners, me in particular, actually. So the first dispensary / marijuana infused products manufacturing license that I worked at in Denver in 2010, which was in 5 Points, if anyone's familiar, is on 24th and Champa. Shout out Greenhouse. This was like OG, one of the first dispensaries to open up in that area. And we got shut down in 2012. They came and served us paperwork, and they came and watched us shut down and made sure. And that was back when the MED only had, well, that was when it was the MMED, and they only had like 2 investigators for the whole entire state. So it was very early on, but it was like, you know, we were too close by like 10 feet to a Montessori school. And it's like, you know, is there a reason? Yeah, there's a reason. Was it a good reason? I think that could be argued. And it's not that kids aren't like, you know, totally, just like immune to anything in society, liquor or any kind of substance that they see people on or using. I mean, this is just part of life. It's like just keeping it out of their eyesight isn't enough, right? They're seeing it when they walk down the street around the corner. They're seeing it in a worse way. And so I just think that it's like the efforts are in the wrong place. They probably can come up with a more common sense way to deal with this, but Arizona, it's interesting. We'll see how it all works out. But I mean, is there a difference between being 1,000 feet away and 500 feet away? I don't think so.
500 feet. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you, Saman. I think this is ridiculous. And I think, you know, as somebody who we just had to lose a location that we had already started to build out because this fucking daycare was not on the Zemas map. And you couldn't see it. So unless you knew it was there, you didn't know it was there. And we'd already framed the building out and been paying rent for 6 fucking months. So now, Mr. Government Man, you did the map wrong. You approved this location because we passed pre-app. So now you owe me some bread. But, the applicant some bread. It's not me directly. But it's just a really frustrating situation. And I'm looking at one of those very imminent, like cute little green lanyards with the MAD badge stuff on it right now. And it takes me back to like, when are things going to make sense? We've been doing that wrong for so fucking long. Like,
well, and just speaking of making sense for a second, I think that when we look at radius rules in general, radius rules that are arbitrary don't make sense. Radius rules need to be calibrated to population density. And the less dense the population, the larger the radius could be. But the more dense the population, the shorter the radius can be. The radius that makes sense for a small rural town doesn't make sense for downtown Manhattan. And so these arbitrary distances, they sound good, but on a practical basis, and we see this and people are acknowledging it in the chat, Troy, other people, what it does is it creates real estate bubbles because it creates limited inventory for running these businesses. And anytime you limit the inventory, you increase the cost. And anytime you increase the cost, that has to be amortized over the products that are eventually sold. And anytime it's amortized over the products that are eventually sold, that increases the cost to the consumer / patient, which is not necessarily ever going to be a good thing. Because all you're doing is creating these massive real estate bubbles. And real estate bubbles aren't nearly as sustainable as just allowing these businesses to go out, set up shop, operate. Some will fail, some won't. Some will do a really good job. There will be M&A, there'll be consolidation, there'll be maturation. But as long as we have these real estate bubbles, those increased costs to operators get borne on the backs and the wallets of the end user. And I don't think anybody could argue that that's fair.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I got a text from one of our viewers that says that, you know, THCA, Delta 8, all those types of shops, you have to be 300 feet from a school.
Wow.
Any type of smoke shop,
crazy.
head shop.
So less requirements for those places than others.
Lack of
that will sell your 3-year-old a pre-roll.
Oh boy.
I like Chris's comment. He's talking about 3 7-year-olds stacked on top of each other with a trench coat on, going into the shop to buy.
They'd be 21 at that point, right?
They would, because math.
Oh man, this is it's such a crazy loophole. Man. Not surprised though. Not surprised. Not surprised.
I'm gonna start an organization called Righteous Radiuses for Realistic Reform. 4R. Let's get it down. Let's get it right.